The African Development Bank forged ahead this week with its inaugural Africa Investment Forum. If you try to drive anywhere in Sandton this week, it was gridlocked. And at the same time, the United Kingdom says it wants to be the largest G7 investor in Africa by 2022. I am taking stock with the UK Trade Commissioner for Africa, Emma Wade-Smith. Britain leaves the European Union 31st of March. Everything goes according to clockwork. There's either a deal or there's no deal. There's a consequence of a deal, there's a consequence of no deal. Whatever happens in Britain on the 31st of March, going into the 1st of April 2019, has an impact on Britain's relationships around the globe. What are you anticipating you're going to have to be doing on the 1st of April?
Well, we're obviously doing a lot of work to think about that, and we have been working over the last year to make sure that there is continuity of trading arrangements. That's been our top priority, and by that I mean the network of economic partnership agreements and association agreements that we have across the African continent between the EU and various countries and various regional groupings. So in South Africa, for example, there's an EU SACU plus Mozambique economic partnership agreement, and we've been working with the governments of those countries
because
to transition.
I mean, we have a trade agreement with Europe. You are part of Europe, so that trade agreement then covers you and Europe. We now need a trade agreement with Europe, which stays, I'm assuming, pretty much the same, except you're excluded from it. How has our relationship changed then into the future?
So I think the story is about continuity and then future change. So what we have said in response to what...
cut and paste the European Union one, stick it onto a 10 Downing Street letterhead, and then send it off to us to sign.
It's a little bit like that,
okay.
And I think my colleagues would wish that it was as simple as that. But essentially, yes. The situation we've been in is we are still a full member of the European Union, and therefore we are not allowed to negotiate new free trade agreements.
So you are actually not allowed to sit down with Rob Davies, for example, and say, this is the way it's going to work from the 1st of April. You've got to wait for the 1st of April before you can begin negotiating.
So negotiations, certainly, but what we have been having is discussions about how you provide continuity and consistency from the end of March. And so that is allowed within the relationship that we have in the European Union. And so we've been sitting down with Rob Davies, with ministers from across the African continent to say, this is the existing arrangement with the EU that you have. We want to make sure that there is no cliff edge at the end of March, that there is continuity in those arrangements. And that is the #1 priority for both sides, to make sure that our businesses know what to expect at the end of March, and that we don't end up with some of these cataclysmic moments that the UK media will talk about.
You don't want your avocados. If you're Royal Causa, former chairman of Nedbank turned avocado farmer in Zanin, who's got big contracts with Tesco, he doesn't want his avos on their way to Sainsbury's or Tesco's next year to be sitting in the docks in Southampton waiting to be offloaded and rotting in the containers because somebody's forgotten to cross a T or dot an I. And that could happen.
Well, we're working really hard to make that not be a reality for anybody, which is why we've been transitioning these economic partnership agreements so that the EU version, as you say, is sort of slightly cut and pasted, and we're looking at some of the intricacies of the detail around that. But what we've said is, first of all, let's ensure continuity. And then, once the UK has left the European Union and we are once more in charge of our own trade policy, let's sit down and talk about what else we can do. Because we know from those discussions that there is definitely room for improvement, and we're really keen, as global free traders and global champions of open trade, we're really keen to see how do we create a freer, more seamless flow of goods and services.
How much more complicated has global trade become in the last 3 to 6 months since Donald Trump has been shouting off his mouth about trade wars with China and lopping levies on Chinese goods imported, the Chinese threatening to respond? Then a week or two ago, Donald Trump tweeting, because that's how you do diplomacy, I hope you understand this, that he and the Chinese premier have had a terribly nice chat and it's all going to be okay, and the world then breathes a sigh of relief, but nothing's really changed. It feels like a desperately uncertain environment for people like yourself to be operating in.
Well, I think there's so much noise around the world now, and you'll be pleased to hear I've got my own Twitter account in order to be able to respond to the demand.
To respond to Donald Trump, saying, no, Don, you're wrong.
Yes. But I think global trade is complex and so interwoven these days that anything that's happening anywhere in the world will have some knock-on effect. And certainly, we hear from industry, and ultimately it's industry that's doing the business, not governments. But we do hear concern about that, because one thing I do know about business is that they want that certainty and they want clarity. And frankly, many companies can do good business whatever the situation. They just need to know what that circumstance is, and so it's the change that can be unnerving.
And you are finding that the British business is open to better trade agreements with South Africa, maybe more favourable trade agreements with South Africa into the future.
Well, that's certainly what we want to achieve, and I know that the South African government is also keen to do that. We already have a really strong and long-standing trading and investment relationship between the UK and South Africa. So somewhere in the region of about £9 billion last year, which was an increase of about 8.5% year on year. So I want to keep growing that, and I think we want to make sure that investment flow that we see from the UK into South Africa continues as well, in line with the President's aspirations to see more foreign investment coming in and more domestic investment happening here. So there's, it's a big agenda, and there's lots to do, but I think South Africa in particular and the African continent holds a very dear part of people's hearts in the UK, and the connections are long and broad. Are
you in a position to offer a guarantee, though, as the Trade Commissioner, that Royal Causes Avos won't rot in the docks from the 1st of April? Are we there yet? Were you confident enough, or is there still lots of work to do?
Well, there is definitely still lots of work to do, and we've got a little bit of time, a little window to do that. The first thing is we're working really hard to try to get a deal. Because we believe that the deal between the UK and the EU is the best way forward, and our negotiators
but that is
are
so
working
controversial
really hard on
politically at home, and again this is treading into territory that is beyond your remit, but we've got your former boss Boris Johnson, who was the Foreign Secretary for a while, and people like Nigel Farage, who is from the right of British politics, being very critical of any deal that Theresa May, your boss, the Prime Minister, is trying to clench. I mean, she seems to have a fairly firm hand on her cabinet, but her party is quite divided on what Brexit should look like. The no deal, the deal, the negotiated deal, what kind of deal? Because the last thing that the Brexiteers want is some sort of laissez-faire, lackadaisical sort of relationship between the European Union and Britain where nothing really changes, which is where the politicians fear this might be going.
So there is definitely a robust discussion going on across the UK.
Such a good word. Yes.
Thank you. And what the government is doing is it's a very intricate negotiation. There are lots of different aspects to it, and they're tricky. And this is about sort of restitching a different relationship between the UK and the EU that has been developing over the last 40 plus years. So, but what I think the negotiations are proceeding apace, and there has been a huge amount of progress.
What happens if it brings down the government before the 31st of March next year? I mean, do you have a contingency plan for that? Surely you must.
Well, I think we're definitely straying into the area of politics, and as a good British civil servant, I'm going to sort of try and swerve the answer to that one.
Okay, here is the slightly less emotive question then. If the government of the day today is not the government of the day on the 31st of March, the outcome could very well be different. Do you have various contingency plans in place just in case?
Well, look, I think I'm not going to get drawn into hypotheticals of what if and that sort of thing, because that would probably be the end of my posting as the Trade Commissioner for Africa, and I'm very happy doing it. But I think everyone is very focused on getting a deal that works for the UK and that works for the European Union. And the government of the day believes very firmly that deal should be possible. And of course, there is work going on to figure out what what a no-deal scenario looks like and the contingency planning around that. But our focus is still very much on getting that deal.
I'm interested to know how you're going to become the biggest G7 trade partner with Africa by 2022. There is a lot of pressure on the United Kingdom as it seeks to negotiate its way out of the European Union with its clothes on, so to speak. We're taking stock with Emma Wade-Smith. More in a few minutes' time.